Hello and welcome to Miniature Adventures. I'm Big Lee, and this week I want to talk about my brushes, the most important tool on my painting table. So this week another unscripted waffle session, but what I'm going to try and do is respond to some questions that I've had on Twitter and other places. People have asked me what sort of brushes I use, particularly as I paint 6mm, and of course everyone makes a big deal out of the fact that these models are tiny, therefore must have tiny brushes. Well, of course my brushes I tend to use down to double naught brushes, but it's the type of brush, the maker brush, that I think they're more aiming at, and for years I have steadfastly held by the idea that Series 7, Winsor Newton Series 7s are the best, and they still are, but they are very expensive. And it has to be said, in these times when everybody's budgets are squeezed, including wargamers, maybe they're not the most economical of options for you. They are still the best tools, and I think if you look after them nicely, and I will come back to that a bit later in the video, if you look after those sort of brushes nicely, they last for years. And indeed I've got some Winsor Newtons here that I still use on a regular basis. However, I don't always buy the most expensive brushes out there. So last year I started experimenting with a few other UK brands, and I treated myself, or tried out, some ProArt Renaissance sable brushes. They're nice, come in a nice green and gold, not bad, mid-priced, pure sable tips, very nice actually. I really like them. In fact, I liked them so much that when the current batch is starting to get a little bit old, I've treated myself to a new set. Actually, to be more precise, what I did was I treated myself and then I handed them to the wife and said, I want those for Christmas. That way I made sure I got brushes for Christmas. And I obviously double alts, one alt, and size ones, they're sufficient for the size painting that I do, and they're not bad, they're pretty good. And again, as I mentioned earlier, it always comes down to the quality of care that you give your brushes will determine what you get out of them and how long they last. So my personal preference is something called Masters Brush Cleaner, just because it's the one that I've managed to get. But there's plenty of other brush soaps and cleaners out there. For water-based acrylic paints on natural hair brushes, you can't really beat something like this, or like I say, any one of the other brush soaps. And it's just a matter about making sure that you don't leave any brushes dirty at the end of the day, that you do give them a clean every now and again, get that point going again. And I always give them, once I've cleaned them and I know that there's no more paint inside the hairs, I will then give them just a little bit more of the brush soap. In particular, this stuff is really good for reconditioning the hairs, just a little bit on there so that it's still a little bit soapy, and then leave that to dry with a nice tight tip. And then when I get to use the brush again, I'll just wash that bit of soapy out, and it just seems to condition the hairs. And as I say, I've managed to get a good year's use out of my ProArt brushes, and many years out of my Winsor & 7s. But it has to be said that I can buy 4 or 5 sets of these for the equivalent set of Winsor & Newtons. So as much as I like my Winsor & Newtons, I think I will be buying the ProArt stuff on a more regular basis, just because they're more economical. And as I say, in these tightened times when nobody can afford anything, wargamers as well, I think these are a really good option. But that's just my personal choice. I'd love to hear your favourite brushes in the comment section below, obviously. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I don't always buy the most expensive brushes. Sometimes I'll buy dirt cheap brushes, depending on the task I'm going to use them for. So I'll get different types of synthetic brushes, nothing fancy. Got this in the range and other art stores. These are for painting large surfaces, dry brushing buildings, things like that. I've got a hog's hair brush for painting large buildings and pieces of terrain. If I'm painting hills, so I made a load of hills last year out of high density foam, and I painted them with the hog's hair brush first before going over them and putting the grass and so on. Really cheap, got this out of the works, I think it was, as a pack of other brushes. Really dirt cheap, but does the job for something like that. I also use a range of other synthetic brushes for things like priming, particularly larger pieces. I've got some smaller versions of these somewhere here that I might use for priming individual figures, although to be honest, as anyone who knows me will know, I like to use spray primers if I can. Does the job perfectly well, I find. For all the 6mm stuff that I've been painting lately, it's all been done with an army painter spray. Does a really good job, goes on nice. Takes seconds to do hundreds of models as opposed to hand painting them. Sometimes I will resort to hand priming a model, depends on the model. Particularly larger models I might choose to do hand priming, but I don't often do that. I would prefer the sprays. The other type of brush that I buy, much to my daughter's annoyance, is I like makeup brushes. These are dirt cheap, particularly the ones I buy, and they are brilliant for dry brushing. So I use the big ones if I'm dry brushing a building, or the smaller ones if I'm doing smaller models. They're nice and soft, they're synthetic bristles, but they're soft, they're rounded heads, and do you know what? They're as good as some of the other brushes that I bought. So I've got some Army Painter dry brushing brushes, and they're lovely, but the brushes are very short. They don't hold a lot of pigment when you're trying to dry brush with them. They're good brushes for dry brushing, but do you know what? The makeup brushes are better, I find. Personal preference. So yeah, I do like to annoy my daughter when we're out shopping. I go, I need some more makeup brushes, darling, and she goes all red, and I get a laugh out of that. So there you have it. So I've got everything from my very expensive Winsor Newtons through to my new choice, my ProArt Renaissance Sable brushes, through to very cheap synthetics and even makeup brushes. So there you go. Hopefully, for the people that asked the question, what type of brushes do I use, I hope that answers the question. So as always, I'd be very interested to hear your opinion on brushes. Everyone's bound to have an opinion. What type of brushes do you prefer? Is there a reason for it? Is there a particular brand that you swear by? Or do you use a range, whatever comes to hand? Is price an overriding factor, or is it just brand loyalty? I'd love to hear from you, find out what you think and what your experience is. It's one of the great things about having a channel like this, being able to share this experience between painters of different levels. You know, some of you out there have been painting for a few years, others have been painting like me for decades, so I'd love to hear all your experiences in the comments below. And of course, if you liked and enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe and share. And of course, if you want to keep up to date with my weekly videos, please tap the bell notification icon. So that's it for this week. Until next week, look after yourself, get in as much gaming as you can, and of course, keep rolling high.